Imagine this. You're sitting across from someone, maybe it's a friend, a colleague, maybe even a family member, and every time you leave that conversation, you feel a little smaller than when you came in. You feel drained, second guessing yourself, wondering if you're the problem. That's not a coincidence. That's what happens when you're in the presence of toxic behavior, and the first step to making those people disappear from your life isn't about fighting back or trying to fix them. It's about recognizing what's actually going on. Because the truth is, you can't change what you don't see. Toxicity doesn't usually show up waving a big red flag. It comes in subtle forms. Sometimes it looks like someone who constantly criticizes you, but frames it as just being honest. Sometimes it's the person who only reaches out when they need something, and suddenly you realize the friendship has become a one-way street. It might be the coworker who always finds a way to undercut your ideas in front of others, leaving you questioning your competence. These behaviors often sneak in so quietly that you chalk them up to quirks or misunderstandings. But here's the truth: if every time you interact with someone, you walk away feeling worse, not better, that's not a quirk. That's a pattern, and patterns are everything. One off day doesn't make someone toxic. We all get frustrated. We all say things we wish we hadn't. But when you start to notice the same behavior repeating, disrespect, manipulation, blame, shifting, or that subtle guilt trip that leaves you feeling responsible for their happiness, you've got to start paying attention, because the way toxic people keep their influence is by convincing you that what you're experiencing isn't really happening. They thrive in your doubt. Recognizing the signs starts with turning the focus inward. Ask yourself, how do I feel after I spend time with this person? Energized, supported, encouraged, or do I feel small, guilty, confused? Your emotions are like the body's smoke alarm. They tell you when something's off, even before your mind can logically explain it. Trust that. If you're constantly walking on eggshells, rehearsing what to say so you don't set them off, that's not normal. That's not healthy. Here's the hard part. Many of us ignore these alarms because we don't want to believe someone we care about could treat us that way. Or maybe we've grown so used to it that it feels normal. Some of you grew up in environments where criticism or manipulation was just part of daily life. So now when you see it, it doesn't raise a red flag. It feels familiar. But familiar doesn't mean safe. Familiar doesn't mean good. It just means you've been exposed to it for so long that you stop questioning it. And if you want toxic people to disappear from your life, you have to relearn what healthy actually looks like. Healthy looks like respect. Healthy looks like being able to disagree without fear of being punished or belittled. Healthy looks like someone taking responsibility for their actions instead of making you feel guilty for holding them accountable. Healthy looks like balance, both people giving, both people growing. If you're the only one carrying the weight, constantly apologizing, constantly trying to keep the peace, you're not in a healthy space. And let's be honest, sometimes the hardest people to spot are the ones closest to us. It's easy to label the angry boss or the gossiping neighbor as toxic. But what about the friend you've known since childhood who always makes you the punchline of their jokes? What about the sibling who only calls when they need money but disappears when you're struggling? What about the partner who dismisses your feelings as overreactions? These are the situations where recognition becomes not just important, but vital. Because when the relationship carries history or love or loyalty, it's tempting to overlook the harm. But ignoring it doesn't make it go away. It just makes it grow deeper. The good news is, once you start to see it, you can't unsee it. And that's powerful, Because the moment you recognize toxic behavior for what it is, you take back control. You stop internalizing their criticism as truth. You stop blaming yourself for the way they treat you. You start to understand that their behavior says more about them than it does about you. Recognition doesn't mean you cut someone off immediately or that you confront them on the spot. It simply means you're no longer blind to what's happening. And when you're no longer blind, you can choose how to respond. So the very first step to making toxic people disappear isn't about them. It's about you. It's about your awareness. It's about giving yourself permission to call things what they are. Because once you can see clearly, you'll stop wasting energy trying to justify their actions, excuse their words, or explain away the way you feel. You'll stop trying to change them and start focusing on protecting yourself. That clarity is the beginning of freedom. And here's the closing thought I want you to hold on to. The moment you recognize toxicity for what it is, you've already started removing its power over your life. Boundaries. This is where everything changes. If recognizing toxicity is the first step, then setting boundaries is the step that actually creates the distance you need. And here's the truth. People don't just disappear from your life because you wish they would. They disappear when you stop giving them access to the parts of you they take advantage of. Boundaries are the locks on the doors of your life, and without them, anyone can walk in, dump their baggage, and leave you to clean it up. Now, the word boundary can sound harsh to some people. It almost sounds like a wall. But a boundary isn't about shutting people out. It's about protecting the space you need to stay healthy, respectful, and whole. Think of it like a fence around a garden. The fence doesn't stop you from letting people in. It just stops people from trampling all over what you've worked so hard to grow. And here's the thing, toxic people hate fences because without them, they get unlimited access. But the moment you put up that fence, they have to face a truth they don't want to face. That you're not available for their games anymore. So what does this look like in real life? It starts with clarity. You have to know what you're willing to tolerate and what you're not. If someone constantly raises their voice at you, maybe your boundary is, I will not continue a conversation when I'm being yelled at. If someone keeps calling you at midnight for things that can wait, your boundary might be, I'll respond during the day, not in the middle of the night. If someone tries to guilt you into doing favors, your boundary is, no, I can't help with that right now. Boundaries don't have to be dramatic. They don't have to come with a big speech. They just have to be consistent, clear, and firm. And here's where most people get tripped up. Boundaries are not about changing the other person. They're about changing your response. You don't control whether someone respects your limit. You control what you do when they don't. If you say, I don't accept being spoken to that way, and they continue, your power isn't in convincing them to stop. Your power is in walking away, ending the call, stepping back. Boundaries without consequences aren't boundaries at all. They're just wishes. Now, when you first start setting them, expect pushback. Toxic people are used to having unfiltered access to your time, your energy, your patience. The moment you start drawing a line, they'll test it. They'll call you selfish. They'll act offended. They'll accuse you of changing. And you know what? They're right. You are changing. You're changing the rules of engagement. You're saying, I'm not going to play this game anymore. And the louder they push back, the more proof you have that those boundaries are working. But here's the part I want you to hold on to. Healthy people don't get offended by boundaries. Healthy people respect them, even if they don't fully understand them. If you say, hey, I can't talk right now, I'll call you back later. A healthy person says, no problem. A toxic person says, wow, guess I'm not important to you anymore. See the difference? Boundaries don't push the right people away. They push the wrong people out. And yes, setting them can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you've been a people pleaser most of your life. Saying no might feel like you're letting someone down. Not answering that late night call might feel like you're abandoning them. But remind yourself of this. Every time you say yes to something that drains you, you're saying no to the things that truly matter: your peace, your health, your purpose. Boundaries aren't selfish. They're necessary. They're how you make sure you actually have something left to give to the people and the things that deserve it. Think about it like this. If you're constantly giving without limits, you're not being generous, you're being depleted. And when you're depleted, everybody loses. You lose your energy, your joy, your clarity. The people who love you lose the best version of you. And ironically, the only people who benefit are the ones who are taking advantage of you in the first place. Boundaries flip that equation. They protect your energy so you can show up fully where it counts. And maybe you're thinking, but what if I lose people when I start setting boundaries? And I'll tell you, that's exactly what's supposed to happen. The people who only stick around when they can cross your limits are not the people you need in your corner. Every relationship you lose to a boundary is one you never truly had to begin with, because real relationships, healthy ones, aren't built on how much you're willing to tolerate. They're built on mutual respect. So don't be afraid of the discomfort that comes with drawing that line. The discomfort is temporary. The freedom it creates is lasting. Boundaries are not just rules, they're a declaration. They say, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, and this is how I will allow myself to be treated. And when you make that declaration, you stop giving toxic people permission to drain you, and you start giving yourself permission to live in peace. That's the power of boundaries. They don't just keep the wrong people out, they make space for the right people to come in. One of the biggest traps toxic people set is making you feel like you owe them an explanation for every decision you make. And if you've ever found yourself giving long, detailed justifications for something that really should have been a simple no, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They ask you for a favor, and instead of just saying, I can't, you launch into a 5-minute monologue about how busy you are, how much you have on your plate, and why you can't possibly make it work. And even after all that explaining, somehow you're still left feeling guilty. That's not by accident. That's the game. The more you explain, the more they twist your words, the more room you give them to manipulate, and the more control they keep. You see, toxic people don't need your explanations. They feed on them. Because explanations create openings. They give them material to push back against. If you say, I can't come tonight because I've got a big project at work, suddenly the response is, well, can't you just leave early? If you say, I can't help because I've got my kids this weekend, the reply is, bring them with you. They'll be fine. Do you see how it works? The second you start justifying, you've given them an invitation to debate your decision, and they will debate it until you cave. That's why one of the most powerful things you can learn is this no is a complete sentence. But here's the thing, most of us aren't taught that. We're taught to be polite, to keep the peace, to soften the blow of disappointing someone. So instead of just owning our decision, we dress it up with reasons and apologies. We think we're protecting the relationship, but what we're really doing is protecting the other person's comfort at the expense of our own peace. And toxic people will take advantage of that every single time. They don't want your truth. They want your access. And the longer you explain, the more access they get. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying you never explain anything to anyone. In healthy relationships, explanation can be part of communication, part of respect. But the difference is, in healthy relationships, you don't feel like you're on trial every time you set a boundary. You don't feel like you need a defense attorney to back you up. You can say, I'm not available, and the other person accepts it, even if they don't love it. Toxic relationships are different. In toxic relationships, every explanation becomes ammunition. So how do you break out of this cycle? You start small. Practice saying no without the extra words. Not harsh, not rude, just simple. No, I can't. No, I'm not available. No, that doesn't work for me. And then stop talking. Let the silence do the work. At first, it's going to feel uncomfortable. You'll feel that urge rise up in your chest, that pull to soften it, to justify it. But the more you resist that urge, the more you'll realize that you don't owe anyone a story just to protect their feelings about your choice. And let's be honest, some people are not going to like it, especially the ones who are used to you over-explaining. They'll push harder. They'll try to guilt you. They'll say things like, wow, you've changed, or used to care more. And you know what? They're right. You have changed. You've stopped giving them the script they use to control you. And that's uncomfortable for them, but it's freeing for you. I'll tell you what else happens when you stop over-explaining. You start to trust yourself more. You realize that your decisions don't need to be validated by anyone else, that your boundaries stand on their own. And with that confidence, something amazing happens. Toxic people start to fade out of your life on their own. Why? Because without your guilt, without your long-winded justifications, without your energy to fuel their games, there's nothing left for them to hold on to. They get bored. They move on. But maybe the most important part of this shift is what it does for your energy. Over-explaining is exhausting. Every time you defend your choices, you're spending mental energy that you could be using for things that actually matter. Your work, your family, your joy. When you strip away the justifications and keep it simple, you stop wasting that energy. You conserve it. You redirect it. And that's how you start building a life where toxic people don't even have a place. So if you want them to disappear, don't hand them the script. Don't give them the raw material to twist against you. Don't make your choices negotiable by over-explaining them. Stand firm, be clear, and remember, no doesn't need decoration, doesn't need excuses, it doesn't need a backstory. It stands on its own. The moment you stop over-explaining, you stop inviting toxic people into the driver's seat of your life. Here's a shift that changes everything. Stop trying to earn respect from people who've already shown you they don't have any to give. When you're dealing with toxic people, it's easy to get stuck in this loop of proving yourself, explaining, defending, trying to convince them that your feelings matter, that your choices make sense, that you're worthy of being treated better. And the harder you try, the more they move the goalposts. Because that's how they keep you hooked. They dangle approval just out of reach, and you chase it thinking that if you just try harder, if you just do more, they'll finally see your value. But here's the truth. Respect isn't something you chase. It's something you embody. The moment you stop putting their opinion above your own, everything changes. Self-respect is the antidote to toxic behavior because it flips the script. Instead of asking, how do I get them to treat me better? You start asking, why am I allowing this in the first place? That shift pulls the power away from them and puts it back in your hands. It says, I don't need you to validate me. I don't need you to approve of me. I don't need your permission to stand firm in who I am. And toxic people hate that, because the second you stop chasing their approval, you become untouchable. Now, self-respect isn't loud. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to prove. Self-respect is quiet, steady, consistent. It's the calm confidence of knowing your worth without having to put it up for debate. And when you start walking in that, something powerful happens. You stop reacting to every little jab, every little guilt trip, every little attempt to control you. Their words don't land the same way anymore because you're no longer filtering your value through their lens. Think about it this way. If you know who you are, if you know what you bring to the table, then someone calling you selfish because you said no doesn't shake you. Someone rolling their eyes because you set a boundary doesn't rattle you. Someone dismissing your feelings doesn't erase them. Their behavior no longer dictates your sense of self. And that's the kind of strength toxic people can't touch. But here's the catch. Self-respect doesn't just happen by accident. You have to practice it. You practice it every time you choose peace over proving. You practice it when you walk away from a conversation that's going nowhere instead of staying just to win an argument. You practice it when you say, I'm not available, without piling on excuses. You practice it when you remind yourself, their opinion of me is not my truth. Every one of those moments builds the muscle of self-respect, and over time, that muscle gets stronger than any manipulation someone can throw at you. And here's something else. The more you respect yourself, the more you start to attract people who reflect that respect back to you. Because you're no longer tolerating crumbs. You're no longer bending over backward for scraps of validation. You're no longer putting yourself at the bottom of your own list. You've raised the standard. And when you raise the standard, toxic people usually do one of two things. They either step up or they step out. And most of the time, they step out because they can't survive in an environment where their tactics don't work anymore. Now, let's be honest, it's not always easy. There will be days when you slip back into old patterns, when the temptation to explain or prove creeps in. That's human. The key is not to beat yourself up when it happens, but to gently remind yourself, I don't have to earn respect from someone who's not willing to give it freely. I already deserve it by how I choose to show up in the world. That's what anchors you when the old voices try to pull you back. And I'll tell you what happens when you start consistently prioritizing self-respect. You get lighter. You feel freer. You stop carrying the weight of other people's opinions like a backpack full of bricks. You stop exhausting yourself trying to manage their moods, their reactions, their expectations. And that space you create, that's where peace lives. That's where confidence grows. That's where the real version of you, the version that isn't watered down by guilt or fear, finally gets to breathe. So when you think about making toxic people disappear, don't start with them. Start with you. Start with the way you talk to yourself. Start with the way you honor your limits. Start with the way you remind yourself daily that you are not defined by anyone else's approval. Because once you start respecting yourself at that level, toxic people won't just disappear by chance. They'll disappear by design. When you shift from chasing their approval to standing firm in your own self-respect, you stop being a participant in their game, and the game ends. One of the hardest lessons to learn when dealing with toxic people is that you don't have to give them the same level of access to you that they've always had. We assume that because someone has been in our life for a long time, because they share a title like family, a friend, or coworker, They automatically deserve unlimited access to our energy and our emotions. But access is a privilege, not a right. And if someone abuses that privilege, you have every reason to limit it. That's not cruelty, it's self-preservation. Toxic people thrive on proximity. The closer they are to you, the more opportunities they have to pull strings, to push buttons, to feed off your reactions. They want you accessible at all times because access is what gives them control. That's why one of the most powerful tools you can use is emotional detachment. It's not about being cold or heartless. It's about creating space between their behavior and your response. It's about refusing to let every word, every mood, every manipulation sink into you like a hook. Think about how they operate. They text you, expecting an instant reply. They guilt you into attending every event. They unload their problems onto you, leaving you emotionally drained. And if you push back even slightly, they ramp it up: anger, guilt, silent treatment, whatever works to pull you back in. But here's the truth: you don't owe instant replies. You don't owe your presence every time they demand it. You don't owe them your emotional availability whenever they decide to stir something up. You have the power to step back. Detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care differently. It means you no longer get dragged into the emotional tug of war that they set up. For example, if they send you a passive, aggressive text, instead of firing back with explanations or arguments, you respond with calm neutrality, or maybe you don't respond right away at all. If they try to bait you into a fight, instead of defending yourself for the 100th time, you calmly disengage. You stop feeding the fire, and without fuel, even the biggest fire eventually burns out. The key is to remind yourself their behavior is about them, not about you. Toxic people want you to take ownership of their moods. They want you to feel like it's your job to fix, to soothe, to prove. But that's not your responsibility. The moment you stop absorbing their emotions as your burden, you reclaim your freedom. You start to see that their words only have as much weight as you give them. You realize that silence, calm, and space can be more powerful than any argument. And yes, at first, it will feel unnatural. If you're used to reacting, if you're used to defending yourself, if you're used to proving your side of the story, then stepping back will feel like you're doing nothing. But doing nothing is exactly what disarms them. Because toxic people feed on reaction. They measure their influence by how much they can get under your skin. The more neutral you become, the more frustrated they get, and eventually they have to look elsewhere for that fuel. Think of it like this: imagine someone knocking on your door every single day, demanding to come in and make a mess. For years, you've been opening the door, letting them in, cleaning up after them. But one day, you stop answering. You hear the knock, but you don't move. Maybe you even peek through the blinds and see them there, but you don't open the door. At first, they'll knock louder. They'll pound, they'll yell, they'll demand. But if you keep holding that line, eventually, they'll stop showing up. Why? Because the access is gone. The control is gone. The reaction is gone. That's exactly what happens when you limit access and detach emotionally. The person doesn't magically change, but your role in the cycle changes. And when you change your role, the cycle can't continue in the same way. You've removed yourself from the game. And here's the beautiful part: when you free yourself from constantly reacting to toxic people, you create room for peace. You create mental space that used to be cluttered with overthinking their words or replaying arguments in your head. You create emotional space to focus on the people who actually uplift you, the work that energizes you, the moments that matter. Limiting access isn't just about pushing someone out. It's about making room for the right things to come in. The truth is, Not everyone deserves the front row seat in your life. Some people can only be trusted with a spot in the balcony or maybe even outside the theater altogether. And that's okay. Protecting your energy isn't selfish. It's necessary. Because the more you protect it, the less space toxic people have to thrive. When you stop giving toxic people unlimited access and stop feeding them with your emotions, you take away the only power they ever had. Here's the truth: if you want toxic people to disappear from your life, it's not enough to just recognize them. Set boundaries, stop over-explaining, and limit their access. You also have to be intentional about who you surround yourself with, because the company you keep either reinforces the toxic patterns you're trying to break free from, or it lifts you into something better. And once you start investing your time and energy into uplifting, supportive connections, the toxic ones lose their grip almost naturally. Think about the difference in how you feel after spending time with certain people. Some leave you drained second, guessing yourself, replaying every word of the conversation in your head. Others leave you lighter, encouraged, more confident, more at peace. That difference isn't random. It's the direct result of the kind of energy you're allowing into your space. Toxic people feed on tearing down, healthy people build up. One robs you of energy, the other restores it. If you want toxic people to fade out of your life, you've got to fill that space with people who give you the opposite experience. And I don't just mean people who always agree with you or tell you what you want to hear. True uplifting relationships aren't about flattery. They're about honesty, accountability, and growth. A supportive friend might challenge you, but they do it in a way that makes you stronger, not smaller. They might point out where you can do better, but it comes from a place of love, not control. The difference is their words come with respect, not ridicule, with care, not manipulation. The reality is, when you start surrounding yourself with these kinds of people, toxic behavior becomes easier to spot because you've got something to compare it to. If you've spent years normalizing criticism, manipulation, or guilt trips, you might not even realize how damaging it's been. But when you experience the calm of a respectful conversation, the joy of mutual encouragement, the safety of trust, you start to realize just how unacceptable the toxic stuff really is. It's like stepping out of a noisy, chaotic room into fresh air. Suddenly, you breathe differently, you see differently, you expect differently. And once your standards shift, you can't go back. You stop making excuses for people who mistreat you because you've seen what it feels like to be valued. You stop tolerating manipulation because you've experienced what real support looks like. You stop fighting for scraps of attention because you've been in relationships where care flows freely without conditions. That's how toxic people quietly disappear. Not because you pushed them out with anger, but because you stopped needing what they were offering. Now, building these uplifting connections doesn't always mean finding a whole new group of friends overnight. It can start small. It can be one person who listens without judgment, one mentor who challenges you in healthy ways, one colleague who genuinely celebrates your wins without resentment. And the more you lean into those relationships, the more you'll realize how starved you've been for that kind of positivity. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. A few solid, supportive people in your life are worth more than a crowd of toxic ones. And let's not forget, sometimes the most important uplifting connection you'll ever build is the one with yourself. Because the way you talk to yourself sets the tone for every other relationship in your life. If your inner voice is always critical, always doubting, always tearing you down, you're more likely to tolerate that same behavior from others. But if your inner voice becomes encouraging, respectful, and compassionate, you'll naturally demand that from the people around you. You'll filter out relationships that don't match the standard you've set for yourself. There's also something powerful about momentum. The more you surround yourself with positive, supportive people, the more you start to mirror that energy yourself. You become the one who uplifts, the one who encourages, the one who respects. And that ripple effect makes your environment healthier all around. Toxic people can't survive in that atmosphere for long because the game they play doesn't work when everyone around you is reinforcing positivity instead of feeding into the drama. And yes, this shift can feel uncomfortable at first. Sometimes you'll realize that people you've kept close for years aren't actually good for you. Sometimes it'll mean spending less time with old friends, even family who aren't willing to treat you with respect. That can be painful. But remember, every time you make space by letting go of someone toxic, you're opening that space for someone better to step in. Growth always requires letting go. So don't just focus on pushing the wrong people out. Focus on pulling the right people in. Invest in relationships that give you life, not ones that drain it. Seek out those who celebrate your boundaries instead of testing them. Hold close the ones who can challenge you with love instead of control. Fill your circle with voices that echo respect, encouragement, and truth. Because the more you do that, the less room there is for toxicity to survive, and eventually, those toxic people won't just disappear from your life. You'll wonder how you ever tolerated them in the first place.